Order. John Cooper to move the motion, please.
I beg to move that this House has discussed the UK-US bilateral relationship. Chair, thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your tutelage. Let me introduce you to a fine Scots word, fankle, F-A-N-K-L-E, which means a tangle, a confusion. President Donald Trump knows what it means, as his mother was a Scot from the Isle of Lewis, and the White House team know one when they see one. And they see one right here in Britain, as our foreign policy is disjointed, dysfunctional and callow. Chair, the White House has fired the first shots in a trade war, with tariffs and the threat of tariffs shaping policy. The EU is under this sword of Damocles, but we could avoid the sort of damage to key exports, such as Scotch whisky, we saw when Mr Trump was last atop Pennsylvania Avenue. The UK enjoys an overall balanced scorecard on trade with the US, though our preponderance of services over goods could yet make us a target should we side with the EU. The UK exported £179 billion worth of goods and services to the US in 2023, and we imported £112 billion worth. Looking at individual countries, the US is by far our largest export market. Germany was a distant second, with about a third as much. In today's world, America innovates, China imitates, Europe regulates, and Britain prevaricates. Just as President Trump is freeing US industry from its shackles, Labour here are imposing more taxes, more red tape, and self-harming nonsense, such as the ruinous Employee Rights Bill, the Union Barons Charter. Labour want to offshore decision-making to courts, to outsource to unelected lawyers, to take dictation from the EU. They want to force through the Chagos fiasco, Britain's biggest capitulation since Singapore in 1942, though we did at least fire some shots 83 years ago. Instead, can the Minister offer some reassurance here today that Britain will get off its knees, will use the freedoms of Brexit and stride confident and bold into the world, striking our own deals? The Russian bear is scratching at our back door. We feel the hot breath of the Chinese dragon on our neck, while, under President Trump, the American eagle is starting to spread its wings. Among all this, which way to turn? For our Foreign Secretary seems like a cork in a raging sea. Labour's instincts in time of trouble are to run for the skirts of nanny Europe. But Europe is fading, with sclerotic growth amid political turmoil. Its two great powers, France and Germany, rudderless and drifting. And though Labour would have us believe they are resetting relations with the EU, the reality is that our position is pathetic. The Prime Minister cannot say what he wants from Europe, while they have their invoice already made out. They want a youth mobility scheme that would put yet more pressure on our own children seeking their first job. And Europe has avaricious eyes on that old sacrificial lamb, fish from our pristine waters. And to hell with British coastal communities who rely upon the sea's bounty. And we're cozying up to China, the Chancellor fresh back from Operation Kowtow with a few cheap baubles, despite China's anti-competitive trade practices, even as the diggers move to build Beijing's London embassy astride critical data cables. We risk feeding the dragon which one day may immolate us. What then of the United States? So long our ally under the umbrella of the much-vaunted special relationship. Surely the choice is obvious. Yet it would mean Labour dealing with a man they dispatched activists to defeat in the US election. He is, to quote that master diplomat, the Foreign Secretary, a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, a tyrant in a toupee. And I quote to Labour's choice of ambassador to Washington, DC, who called the returning president a bully, reckless and a danger to the world. The Damascene conversion our diplomats have lately undergone, Mr Trump is now a nice man, KKK jibes, old news, will matter not a jot on Capitol Hill. They neither forgive nor forget. The die is cast. What's said cannot be unsaid by fawning. And while the Foreign Secretary boasts of having a meal with the President, perhaps the Minister could confirm both how little access he had to the President and just how massive was the humble pie he was forced to pretend he enjoyed. Huge though these problems are, they are nothing compared to that Chagos deal, which will see us cede the strategic joint UK-US Diego Garcia base to distant Mauritius and pay billions to lease it back. We saw the unseemly haste with which Labour wanted to push this deal through in the face of warnings that Mauritius was both moving ever closer to expansive China and malign Iran. And now the Foreign Secretary is moving at pace again, scuttling to try to explain to Secretary of State Marco Rubio that the deal is just a job to see off a legal opinion, not a decision, that there may be an issue with the Chagos Islands and Diego Garcia in particular. Yes, negotiations were begun by this previous government. We did not, however, conclude those negotiations, and we certainly would not have considered the ludicrous terms on offer here, where we take something of ours, give it away, and then pay through the nose to borrow it back. The Americans already see what this is: a supine Britain, afraid of a possible legal setback, falling over itself to avoid offending a foreign government. It's nothing short of a national humiliation. We have a Labour government frightened of its own shadow, happier to be soft-touch law-takers, not lawmakers, who would have this sovereign parliament infantilised and pushed around by bewigged silks and the Brussels Secretariat. This is a government more worried about the price of Oasis tickets than about the cost of making our elected representatives subservient to quangos and arm's-length bodies, and now to the National Assembly in Port Louis, Mauritius, which is further from Diego Garcia than London is from Rome. Aboard his luxury jet, he seems more interested in a Gulfstream G700 than in the G7 countries. Whisking him to the US, the Foreign Secretary might consider a quote from Mr Rubio: "A compromise that is not a solution is a waste of time." Against that sort of clear thinking, our toadying diplomats look like battery toys plugged into the mains. Out of their depth, out of touch, out of control. China knows the true value of bases such as Diego Garcia. It's even building artificial islands, the Great Wall of Sand, in the South China Sea as unsinkable aircraft carriers. The US will, rightly, torpedo Labour's woeful Chagos sellout. Certainly will.
I'm grateful. Thank you, Sir John. I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this important and timely debate. But does he agree with me that despite the best efforts of the Labour government opposite, there is a long-standing and enduring relationship between the USA and Scotland and the rest of the UK? But more importantly, from our perspective as Scottish MPs, Tartan Week in New York is a very good example of that strong relationship between the US and Scotland.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. I agree completely, and I was privileged to join him in Tartan Week in America, and a key showcase for all things Scottish it was too. And we are lucky as well that President Trump is effectively an Ayrshire businessman, since he owns a golf course in Scotland. But in the event of the Chagos deal being vetoed, in effect, by America, in the event of that mortification, would our Foreign Secretary dare continue? What price Downing Street's hostage to fortune claim that the Foreign Secretary will be imposed by the next election? So if their 3-amp fuses do not blow too soon, perhaps our underpowered team might get to discuss defence with America. The US wants NATO to pull its budgetary weight. So might we hear today where Labour are with plans to lift defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, given the first casualty of their mishandling of the economy has been growth? Will it happen, and when? If we are moving ever closer to faceless and distant Strasbourg and Brussels, as yesterday's visit by the PM surely signposts, we ought to consider Ireland, which sums up America's issue with European freeloading on defence. They are not in NATO, yet are under the aegis of the British-supplied nuclear deterrent. The undersea cables, which see US tax dollars converted to euros and piled into the coffers of Dublin, are at risk from Putin's shadow fleet. These data cables are as critical today as were the convoys from America and Canada during the Battle of the Atlantic, and every bit as vulnerable too. Their only defence, since Ireland has zero underwater capability, Britain. The same Britain Ireland is happy to deduce in the international courts over the Troubles. We have a rare window of opportunity with Mr Trump and his White House team, but the puerile insults keep coming. The titanic struggle playing out now is between the oldest superpower, the United States, and the newest, China. Europe, prickling with faux outrage at the new US president, is sidelined. And it is at best indifferent to the UK, and wants to make even new defence agreements transactional, all about commercial deals, even as the fires of conflict blaze. China need not be our enemy, but it is not our friend. Its industrial heft means genuine competition in many areas is impossible. Their annual production of batteries is sufficient for global needs. No wonder UK plans for a gigafactory have come to nothing. So we must seek every advantage we can, and the US offers the most fertile ground. We speak the same language, George Bernard Shaw's adage that we are two nations separated by a common language notwithstanding. The late unpleasantness of the American Revolution is in the rearview mirror. We have a shared history of standing for liberty, and our transatlantic cooperation on defence is unmatched. US forces are the big stick. They see ours as a precision scalpel. Labour do not lack for numbers in this Parliament. Is there no one in their serried ranks who can see that an Anglophile US President, a man of immense pragmatism, offers us a chance to form a mutually beneficial relationship and perhaps a full trade deal? Or are they the new model terracotta army, which looks impressive from a distance, but which sits mute, eyes painted on, as their leaders tread the same old worn and fruitless path to Brussels and show a bit of ankle to China? Enough Oliver Twist. Please, Mr Xi and Miss von der Leyen, may we have some more? In 1942, Prime Minister Winston Churchill boarded a flying boat on Loch Ryan in my Dumfries and Galloway constituency, destination the United States. His message then was, let us go forward together. We should deliver the same message to Washington today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Order, order. I will be calling members that bob, so please make sure you bob if you wish to be called. Secondly, I will remind members that you should be here for the start of the debate if you want to contribute, but I will try to be generous. And thirdly, so we will all get in, let's try to work on the basis of about 4 minutes each. It's informal at this stage, but obviously as things go on, we'll look at that again. Thank you. I call, let me have a look at my list. I call Cole Gill.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir John, and let me thank the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway for calling this debate on the UK-US bilateral relationship, and I listened closely to his speech, and we agree on the importance of the UK-US relationship and our desire to build on those bonds. Sir John, Britain's place in the world matters after the needless fights and petty politicking of the last government, which did so much damage to our relationships around the world. I am proud that our Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary has made reconnecting with our allies a priority of this government. After the furore of the Northern Ireland Protocol, the collapse of US-UK trade talks and strains following Brexit, I am glad that we have a government in charge that is ready to put the national interest rather than party interests first. Sir John, it was Winston Churchill who first described the UK-US relationship as special. And for centuries, the relationship between our two nations has been one of collaboration, cooperation, and enduring partnership. And together we have defended the world from tyranny and two world wars, stood strong in the Cold War, and for centuries worked closely towards our mutual security and prosperity. And let me put on record my congratulations to President Trump on his inauguration, and we look forward to working with him in the years ahead. As the Prime Minister has said, we will continue to build upon the unshakable foundations of our transatlantic alliance as we tackle the global challenges together. Our shared language, close cultural exchange, our strong ties in commerce, the many links between our peoples through business, friendships and through family. Indeed, President Trump's mother was Scottish, and I know he has always been very fond of our country. So I am sure that the depth of friendship will continue. The Prime Minister had a warm and constructive conversation with President Trump the other week, where they discussed the economy. He stated that they get along well, and the Prime Minister is doing a good job. There has been a lot of noise around our relationship with the United States and the new administration, much of it coming from the opposition benches, and there has been and there always will be things that we disagree on, and we clearly did not agree with Elon Musk's outlandish attacks on members of this government. But differences on single matters of policy do not diminish the deep and enduring relationship between both of us. I dare say the previous government disagreed on many things with the Biden administration. However, I regret to note that the opposition really seems to be getting carried away with itself, with members seeming to suggest that the government must choose between our relationship with the EU and our relationship with the United States. The Shadow Business Secretary suggested last week that improving our relationship with both the EU and the US was akin to trying to make love simultaneously to both a rhino and a sloth. Leaving aside why anyone would want to do either of those things, isn't it exactly this destructive attitude that has caused so much damage to British businesses and UK trade over the past 14 years? In these dangerous times, Sir John, the idea that we must choose between our allies, that somehow we're with either America or Europe, is wrong. The UK's total trade in goods and services with the United States was $294 billion last year and $822 billion with the EU. And our coordination with the United States on defence, security and foreign policy is indispensable, as it is with Europe as our closest neighbours. Attlee did not choose between allies. Churchill did not choose. The national interest requires that we work with both. And I know that in the years ahead, the UK will stand tall again on the world stage. This government's commitment to international law, its commitment to growing our economy and free trade, and its work navigating the new, more challenging multipolar era, all are worthy of opposite members' serious engagement, not party political sniping. Our shared history with the United States, close security and defence partnerships, economic ties matter more than words. And I know that this government will continue to invest in the transatlantic relationship in the years to come. Thank you.
Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure serving your chairmanship. Before I begin, I'd like to draw members' attention to my register of interest to note that I serve on the British-American Parliamentary Group. And I'd like to thank the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway for bringing this important debate before the House. As President George H.W. Bush once said, America has no truer friend than Great Britain. This is a sentiment that has been repeated time and again, but sadly we now find ourselves with a government seemingly intent on weakening this vital bond. We have a Foreign Secretary who, without hesitation, labelled the leader of the free world a racist KKK neo-Nazi sympathiser. We have a Health Secretary who referred to him as an odious little man. And perhaps the most concerning of all, we have a Prime Minister who accused the leader of the free world as, quote, leading an attack on democracy. This is a far cry from the leadership figures like Churchill, Thatcher and even Blair, who understood the value of forging strong and meaningful relations with our closest ally. Unfortunately, it is not just their words of woke condemnation that are cause for concern, it's their actions as well. The Trump administration has been unequivocal in expressing its concerns over the Foreign Secretary's reckless proposal to cede sovereignty over the strategically vital Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Yet the Foreign Secretary pressed ahead, attempting to finalise the deal before President Trump officially took office. This pattern of misguided priorities and dangerous diplomacy cannot be ignored. So I ask, does the government believe the special relationship no longer matters? Prime Minister after Prime Minister, President after President have all been steadfast in their commitment to this enduring relationship. Why? Because both sides recognise that trade is worth over £300 billion, with 1.2 million Americans working in British companies and 1.5 million British citizens working for American firms. The UK imports around £58 billion in goods from the US, and we export £60.4 billion in return. Our Chancellor has stated she is focused on growth, so surely consolidating and strengthening these economic ties must be a top priority. The previous government were in talks with President Trump over a post-Brexit deal that would have seen trade increase by potentially 3, 4 or 5 times. And it's deeply concerning that some members on the government benches, and indeed all those on the Liberal Democrat benches, seem intent on undermining the biggest democratic decision this country has ever made, our decision to leave the European Union. Rejoining the EU customs union would not only be undemocratic, but would also damage our special relationship with American businesses and prevent us from fostering our own independent trade deals. President Trump, as my honourable friend recognised, is an Anglophile. He has property in Scotland. He has a deep sentimental connection with British culture and the royal family. It would be regretful to see that bond undermined by a government determined to placate the cultural left at every opportunity. Therefore, it is essential that the government invites President Trump over for a state visit at the earliest opportunity. This would send a powerful message to the world that the special relationship between our two great nations is as strong as ever. So, to conclude, Sir John, the government must stop playing politics with our national interest. The United States is, and always will be, our greatest ally. We share a history, a culture, and most importantly, a vision for how the world should be. The government must act now to secure our future and preserve the special relationship for generations to come.
Steve Young.
Thank you, Sir John, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and thanks to the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway for securing this debate, and I look forward to visiting your constituency in a couple of weeks in recess for a short holiday. And Sir John, like the UK, the USA recently voted for decisive change, and I heartily congratulate President Trump on his election. And people here in the UK and across the Atlantic have been feeling the impacts of low economic growth, a decline in productivity, a decline in GDP per capita for many years. And from Mansfield in Massachusetts to my constituency of Mansfield in Nottinghamshire, people are feeling that impact in their pockets, and they know how tough things are out there for their families, and the recent changes in both governments are very clearly a response to the frustration felt by both electorates. It's therefore in both our countries' interests to work together to deal with this issue, and despite many trying to highlight the differences between the two administrations, we do indeed have a great deal in common. Both governments have made much of their agenda for growth, with the US Secretary of State for the Treasury, Scott Bessent, saying an increase in GDP should be seen as one of the key performance indicators of the Trump presidency. And here at home, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has also made it clear that economic growth is the #1 mission of this government. And it's been reiterated by the announcements in the past week. And we all understand that primarily a government must ensure the economic security of the electorate and give them confidence that they'll be better off. But in order to earn that right to be heard, parties, whether in opposition or in government, must prove beyond doubt that they can also ensure the safety and security of the nation, to even earn the right to be heard on the crucial issue of the economy. And so here in the UK, we have been steadily increasing our defence spending as a share of GDP over the last 10 years. It's currently at just over 2.3%, higher than the NATO target and higher than most other NATO countries. The new administration in the United States wants NATO allies to do more, and I agree that we must. We live in an increasingly dangerous world. It's right that we and our European allies are asked to do so and do so. Indeed, only yesterday the Prime Minister was in Brussels urging our European neighbours to spend more on defence and to step up and shoulder more of the burden. And the threat of Vladimir Putin and Russia cannot be underestimated, and we do so at our peril. Indeed, I feel the government must go further with an aspiration to spend in closer and at 2.5% and beyond 2.5% on defence as soon as possible. This alignment of priorities should be seen as an opportunity for us here in the UK. It's an opportunity for the UK to be the bridge between US and European neighbours, and most importantly NATO. And because of that, we can take that case to the United States by jointly demonstrating our unshakable commitment to the alliance through our contributions to defence spending. And Britain must take the lead on this agenda. And just to conclude, Sir John, as a former CEO in the United States and as someone who has spent many years there in Massachusetts and California, I wholeheartedly support the government's efforts to work closer with the new US administration, special relationship is really paramount to the international diplomatic network. Both administrations share a renewed confidence from their electorate based upon the common agendas that I've outlined. And I believe it's on these that we must build now a much stronger relationship with the United States going forward.
Jim Shannon.
Real pleasure to serve under your chairship, and can I thank the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway for raising this topic. This is a very timely moment to raise this issue, and as we look to the start of the new US administration, I'll begin by saying that this administration offers an opportunity for greater UK-US relations, and this is something that we should jump at. Whilst I may not always have been the greatest supporter of the man that Donald Trump has been portrayed in the media, I certainly admire some of the steps already taken in this administration, and I'm very pleased to see a presidency which seems to have a grasp of the special relationship with the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland that we should treasure. We have moved from a former president who called us Brits, and that was meant as a slur, by the way, and he also promised that no orange feet would ever be in the White House, so I could never have went because I'm an orange man. So he had very, very clear, biased opinion on relation to some. So we now have President Trump, a man who treasures his Ulster Scots roots and has a respect for our monarchy, which we all hold. What a difference a year makes. I'm very heartened to hear the interview in which the President highlighted the massive concern with the EU, one of which many of us share, and yet with that interview he indicated his belief was that the relationship with the UK could be retained. However, there's a real possibility of a friendship between our nations being restored to what it once was, and that can only benefit us on both sides of this specific ocean.
Would the honourable member give way?
Me too, yeah.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and would he agree with me that it would be utterly outrageous to have a situation that any trade deal or benefits of deals with the US would not be equal to Northern Ireland as an integral part of the United Kingdom because of the protocol? Would he agree with me that this Labour government needs to take action and remove the Irish Sea border so that Northern Ireland can benefit from any trade deal that is done with the UK?
I thank my honourable friend and colleague for bringing that forward, and the honourable lady for Robert Ban stands alongside the rest of us in relation to this. I'm further encouraged, of course, as well that Vice President J.D. Vance has close Ulster Scots roots that have shaped him, and now is the time to highlight the fact that so much good in America has a foundation in our shared Ulster Scots values of hard work, of courage, of family, of commitment and fairness. There are multiple large businesses in my constituency, such as Rich Sauces, Lakeland Dairies, who have a great business cooperation with the United States of America. There's so much space for greater investment and economic improvement for both the Northern Ireland and the US. The US and Canada are two of Northern Ireland's important markets, both for exports and inward investment, with over 320 North American firms choosing to establish there. There's the relationship that we have. In the 12 months leading up to March 2024, exports to these markets reached £2.3 billion, highlighting the wealth of opportunities available for local companies. So we have a new opportunity under a new administration to make new conditions and make Northern Ireland even greater and bigger within this great United Kingdom of Great Britain. Indeed, many Americans have their roots in what is now Northern Ireland, and in Scotland, the Scots-Irish or the Ulster Scots roots are something to be proud of, and I do believe that we can and should build on these links to bring greater cultural tourism to Northern Ireland, and this is something that the Northern Ireland Assembly will work on as well. However, there's more to be done, and we are a place of peace and open for business, and this needs to be highlighted not simply by the Northern Ireland Executive, but from this place here in this debate today. I finish with this, Mr. Chairman, because I'm very conscious of the numbers who want to speak and the time limit. Donald Trump is a businessman of action, and he responds to that. His administration has been working hard since day one to bring about change. So let's ensure that a greater friendship and business cooperation with the United Kingdom, and in particular with Northern Ireland, are brought to his attention and acted upon as a matter of urgency, and not left to linger, as we would say, in the ether, to use an Ulster Scotism. The time to act is now, so let's get going and improve a mutually beneficial relationship. I look forward very much to the Minister's response. He always tries to give us the answers that we request, and to the Shadow Minister as well, a lady of integrity. Thanks so much.
Thank you. John Slinger.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to, first of all, thank the Honourable Member for Dumfries and Galloway for bringing to this chamber such an important subject. No political party has a monopoly on patriotism or on the flag, and certainly not on the UK-US relationship. It's a relationship vested in our shared values of democracy, of freedom, and of the international rules-based system. It's based on our shared history of defending and nurturing these values. And frequently we have done this fighting side by side in wars. It's a relationship based around our armed forces cooperating together and our intelligence services working so closely together in our mutual national interests. But most fundamentally, it's a relationship between two peoples based upon friendship, on exchange and on respect. And it's in this context that I must refer to the Honourable Member for Dumfries and Galloway's words, which I felt were somewhat hyperbolic and unbecoming of such an important subject. He spoke about supine Britain, and I'm quoting him here, national humiliation, he said. Our defence was, compared to the United States, merely a precision scalpel. I find this somewhat hypocritical, given that he is a member from a party which saw our armed forces shrink, in the case of the army, to the smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars, and so we on this side will not take any lectures from him on our armed forces. He spoke about toadying diplomats. Now, I regard that as deeply offensive to the diplomats that work around the clock, around the world, looking after our national interests and our citizens when they're in peril and doing everything they can to enhance our international relationships. He spoke about our ministers on this side having made comments in the past about President Trump. I merely ask if he has investigated ever the comments of the former British Prime Minister and Mayor of London regarding President Trump. Referring to torpedoing Labour's policy, I believe, is also unfortunate and dangerous language. I will, of course, defer to my honourable friend, the Minister, to speak about the government's bilateral relationship with the USA. But perhaps, if I may, Sir John, I would like to touch on a couple of personal aspects regarding the bilateral relationship. In 2009, 16 years ago, I was very fortunate to be invited by the United States State Department to take part in an international visitor leadership program, a 3-week visit to the United States. And that is an example of the US investing in the bilateral relationship. Indeed, it does amuse me that, the rumour is that people who go on these IVLP visits are deemed as people who may one day have some influence. Well, 16 years later, I am an MP, so they must have had something right. I've also, of course...
when we were in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and there's three of us we were in the Assembly, the United States government sponsored us back in the late 90s, early 2000s to go to America to learn how to govern. So not just as gentlemen and gentlemen benefit, but there's actually 3 of us here who benefit from it as well.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I support all such schemes that strengthen the relationship between our two countries. I've also seen the military cooperation between our two countries in operation in Iraq when I visited Baghdad in 2005 and 2006 with Prime Minister Blair's Special Envoy to Iraq, the late Right Honourable Anne Clwyd, MP. I also have good friends in the United States, as I'm sure we all do, across this chamber. And I want to refer, if I may, Sir John, to my late friend, Michael McCarthy, who I got to know while we were both studying master's degrees, in my case in international studies at Durham University in 2001, and in whose memory I established a lecture at my old college at Durham University College, which is to raise money for a travel bursary in his name so that students can visit the United States during their studies who wouldn't perhaps have been able to without that. This is the special relationship in action, investing in the special relationship to develop friendships. So the bilateral relationship, Sir John, is a relationship that transcends party political boundaries. It's one that isn't owned by one party. It's one that should not be exploited for political purposes, particularly when, or political gain, particularly when these two countries, the United States and the United Kingdom, have so much to gain from this relationship, and indeed, so does the rest of the free world, which in some ways depends on a very healthy, strong, bilateral relationship between our two great countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the cooperation of colleagues. You will see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people now standing. I'm calling the front benches at 3:28. So brevity would be appreciated. 3 to 4 minutes would be brilliant. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Sir John. When it comes to debating the special relationship or the potential with this incoming administration, I think I'm in a fortunate position. Not just that for 10 years I've stood up and defended President Trump. I was very much on my own in those days. But actually, I know half his cabinet that are coming in. We should consider ourselves incredibly lucky. It isn't just, as the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway said, the President that's an Anglophile. I can promise you half the cabinet are Anglophiles. Senior members of the administration indeed have children at school in London as we speak. So we've got a very, very unique opportunity over the course of the next 4 years, and I really hope it's one that we exploit. I can tell you that during his last term as President, Trump said to me personally, he really wanted to do a free trade deal with the United Kingdom. Now, I know he's very keen on tariffs, and tariffs are being put on all over the world, and no doubt the EU is going to feel some of it. But with us, he was very happy to have a free trade deal because he felt it wouldn't be unfair because we're roughly operating on similar levels and similar costs. So those opportunities are fantastic. And on defence, I mean, we should face the fact, without America, we are defenceless, so it matters. But if you think about the bit that we give back, I think Diego Garcia is probably the single most important thing right now that we give America. Without it, they have not got access to the Middle East, to India, and much else. It is the single most important island in the world for America. Well, after Hawaii, obviously. But it really matters to them. And the news that we've had in the last hour, that the government is a push ahead with the surrender of the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands, at now a reported cost of up to £19 billion. I'm sure that can't be true. But I would just warn the government on this. You may not be getting huge pushback from America at this moment in time. That's because they have a list as long as your arm of other priorities. But once they realise that we haven't even got this to give them anymore, then our value to America in that two-way relationship becomes considerably reduced. I genuinely fear that if this continues and the American administration wakes up to this, and I could quote 3 members of the cabinet who I've spoken to personally about this, I think our chances, not just of avoiding tariffs, but of moving on to a sectoral free trade deal will all but evaporate. The special relationship will be dangerously fractured if the government carries on with this. And I urge them, please, 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 do give the American administration a few weeks to think about this while they settle into office. And on the economics of it, just one quick point, if I may finish on this. In 2008, the Eurozone economy was exactly the same size as the American economy, exactly the same size. 16 years on, the American economy is now double the size of the Eurozone. And whilst we don't actually have to say America not Europe or Europe not America, the really important thing is we understand where the growth is. We understand where the investment will come from. And whatever new terms we seek with Brussels, and if it's just a good relationship, that's fine, we must not tie ourselves to an EU rule book that prohibits free trade with the USA. Economically, they are the future and the EU is the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure serving the company and your chairmanship. I would like to congratulate the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway for his eloquent and passionate speech, as he would assume I don't agree with much of what he said. I would also like to I'm also pleased to follow the man who was once called the 31st most famous person in Britain, according to YouGov in 2024. I'm sure in 2025 he will be looking to move up the chart as quickly as possible. I always think of, when I've thought of what's happened the last couple of days, my mind often drifts back to a very wet holiday in Cornwall a couple of years ago, where I read The Art of the Deal. And if anybody wants to see what the thinking of President Trump is, it's just read that book there. And the one thing he says, the worst thing a person can do when he wants to make a deal is to look too desperate. And the other thing he says, the most important thing, is to have leverage in that deal. Now, there has been a lot of talk since November how we want to be friends with President Trump, and a lot of people have taken back what they've said about him. But the truth is we have to look at the deal and the leverage that we have. We are always going to be strategically important to the US. Our relationship has deep roots in defence and security and intelligence. Our armed forces have always fought alongside each other. The United States can access UK intelligence networks in states where it lacks its own, and gets to work through British counterparts, like in the Commonwealth, in many places where we hold more significant historical ties. And the UK also gets a good deal. We have a great bilateral intelligence sharing agreements. UK diplomats in the US have a particularly strong relationship with key policymakers. But my worry about this, and this is my worry going into this debate, that suddenly we are going to turn this debate into personality. We're going to start to talk about the personality of Donald Trump. We're going to start talking about the personality of the Prime Minister. Well, let me tell you, presidents and prime ministers come and go. In 4 years' time, Donald Trump will not be president anymore. That's the US Constitution says that. And I think for too long with this debate, when we have talked about the special relationship, we have reduced it down to personality. Now, that may go back to Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. But let's not forget, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan fell out of the Falklands when Reagan tried to intervene. I think the only appropriate role, and this is what we have to do going forward, for all of us on all sides of the House, whether they're supporters of Trump or not, or whatever we think of him personally, the fact is we have to be a critical friend. We can't blindly obey or expect obedience from each other. That's not how it works. I recall many years ago, when I was working for Lord Tuick, he gave a speech on the UK-US involvement in Iraq. And he said then, true friends tell each other the truth, no matter how difficult and painful that may be from time to time. It is up to the government to be honest, this government, to be honest and plain speaking with our American friends. It must be a true partnership, in which we do not always hitch our wagon to America's star on foreign policy. Now, this has been done before, Sir John. We've had a situation in the 1960s where Lyndon Johnson desperately wanted this country to get involved in the debacle of Vietnam. We had the National Security Advisor, McGeorge Bundy, advising the President, we want to make it very sure that British get it into their heads that it makes no sense for us to rescue the pound in a situation where there is no British flag in Vietnam. Wilson offered Johnson no reassurances. Generally, those that aligned with his own view on the right course of action, including the British bases at Suez, would be maintained. But he did not give in on the matter of Vietnam. And I have to say this with all candour, I wish we'd had the same attitude in the early 2000s when we were approaching the situation in Afghanistan. Deals will have to be made in America. But we have to remember this. Whoever the president is, whether it's President Trump, President Biden, President Kennedy, the American president is elected with one aim in mind, to make sure he gets the best deal for America. So what's the point in electing him anyway? It would be the same for us in this country. We would expect the British Prime Minister to get the best possible deal. But in an uncertain time, that does not mean we forego our principles. And we don't have to be selective in our battles. We can make our views clear. We can remain strong. But our priority must always be this country, and put this country's priorities first. That is the only way we can continue to make this relationship special. Thank you, Mr. Sir John.
John.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve on your chairmanship, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Dumfries and Galloway, for securing this debate at this pivotal time. It is, if I may, typically prescient of him to have done so. When considering these remarks, my first thought was to try to embarrass the government by replaying all the disgraceful, disobliging and damaging comments made by members of the Labour Party about America, and in particular President Trump. It might be fun, I thought, to see members opposite squirm, particularly if I could find some choice comments by the Minister himself. However, having researched these dreadful, embarrassing comments, I cannot in good conscience replay them here. I'm a patriot. I have fought for my country all over the world, often alongside our American cousins and usually with an American as my boss. For General Schwarzkopf in the First Gulf War, on the staff of the superb General David Petraeus in the Second Gulf War, and under the Marine Corps General Richard Mills in the Helmand River Valley of Afghanistan. In Sierra Leone, my bacon was well and truly saved by the USS Kearsarge and its embarked force of Marines. So I cannot replay Labour's embarrassing catalogue of errors or risk making our relationship with the United States any weaker than it currently is. Indeed, I have been doing my own bit to strengthen the Anglo-American relations in my own small way by employing as my senior parliamentary assistant a no-nonsense native New Yorker from Queens. And when Gloria tells me to jump, I don't ask why, I simply say how high. But my relationship with my parliamentary assistant should never be replicated at a national level. We need to be a strong nation and to conduct our relations from that position of strength. Much of what we contribute we cannot, of course, talk about because it is secret, and long may it remain so. But in the public realm, it is very clear that the government is playing for time with its strategic defence review, which is primarily there to produce the political cover for increasing defence expenditure to 2.5% of GDP. This is a mistake being played out in public. By not having a threat-based and foreign policy-led review, we are missing a huge opportunity to face down the real-world threats we see today. Everyone in government seems to have forgotten the old adage, prepare for the war you don't want to have to fight. The answer instead is, it seems, is 2.5% of GDP. Now what's the question? America has a clear-eyed view of its national interest, and we should have one of ours. It has been striking the speed with which the Trump administration has hit the ground running. Not for him the interminable list of reviews, task force and consultations which our own government prefers. It would be remiss of me not to mention the Chagos Islands, which our government is proposing giving away the sovereignty of, only to lease back at vast expense to the British taxpayer. Surely the worst plan since the Prime Minister hired a voice coach. The Prime Minister must rethink the proposed course of action and not simply hope that it never reaches the top of the President's in-tray. And I echo the sentiments of the Honourable Member for Clacton in that. It will, and this government will be embarrassed at how cack-handedly this fiasco has been handled. The government should climb down, and climb down quickly. In the late 1950s, the French were demanding all US forces leave French soil. And Dean Rusk asked pointedly, does that include the dead ones in the military cemeteries? The UK's relationship with the US was probably at its lowest ebb following Suez. It has improved since and is strong today. Much of that strength was paid for with the sacrifice of our own troops, serving alongside and for our American cousins. The government must not squander that inheritance. Instead, they honour our fallen by making this country stronger and forging a stronger special relationship with the United States.
Thank you. You can see that we have about 11 minutes left. Let's divide it between the three remaining speakers. Dr. Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Sir John, for calling me to speak. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I commend the member for Dumfries and Galloway for securing this really important debate at this time. For Claxton rightly talked about the huge advantages of a trade deal with the US. As a vet who grew up on a farm, I would just gently point out that not all standards are the same. And we know that in any trade deal, the US will be very keen to sell us products such as chlorinated chicken, beef that's been produced using growth hormones and farming methods that use antibiotics to a higher extent than we would do. And not only would these undermine our environmental and animal welfare standards, it would actually put our farmers at a competitive disadvantage. And it's not just vets and farmers who are proud of our high animal welfare standards, it is also the British public. And they don't want them compromised. And we'd urge the Minister to ensure in any trade deals that our farmers and our animal welfare are protected. To move on, the US's withdrawal from the World Health Organization presents a significant challenge for UK public health, as the US provided about 1/5 of the entire World Health Organization's budget, and this departure creates an immediate funding shortfall. This is not only UK public health that will be affected, it's global public health, and the intent to withdraw from the World Health Organization will restrict communications from the Centres for Disease Control and Prevention. These measures are likely to have a significant implication for global and UK public health security. The US plays critical roles in surveillance of infectious diseases, including direct support to develop capacity overseas from the threat of antibiotic-resistant infections to recognising and investigating emerging infectious diseases with pandemic potential. It is also USAID programmes that are often heavily involved in ensure access to vaccines for diseases such as polio, which has almost been eradicated, and while it is still present anywhere in the world, it's still a threat to the UK as well.
So the UK and the US has long led on humanitarian aid, saving lives and preventing crises. Scrapping USAID abandons that leadership, worsening global instability. International aid fosters security and economic growth, and reducing forced migration. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the UK must persuade the US to rethink this decision?
Thank you for your insightful comment. Yes, I totally agree. Because in both these scenarios, withdrawal from key agencies will reduce global awareness and increase the chances of future global health crises. And World Health Organization collaborating centres around the world, including those in the US, directly inform the development of our annual influenza vaccine that is a vital aspect to reducing what is a significant pressure on the NHS every winter. Meanwhile, it is unclear currently how the US stances to wider public health agencies may shift in the future, because just this week, the World Organization for Animal Health reported the emergence of highly pathogenic H5N9 avian influenza in poultry for the first time in the US. Now, this is an evolving situation for which the Centre for Disease Control would normally provide crucial updates. Now, how orders to cease communications may impact this service remains to be seen. And finally, Sir John, the UK also invests heavily in supporting capacity building for overseas infectious disease surveillance as part of delivering our own national action and public health plans. I'd like to ask the Minister, are there plans to conduct an impact assessment on how the withdrawal from the US from key public health agencies may impact public health security here in the UK? And while we totally understand that we cannot replace all that US funding, does the government envision a requirement or see opportunities for the US to expand or review its existing programmes to ensure stability of its global public health interests? Because for so many people in need around the world, the UK and US foreign aid has been the difference between life and death. And whether tackling climate change or pandemics or extreme poverty, the Liberal Democrats believe in global solutions to global problems and the importance of international development to building a more peaceful and prosperous world, with the UK leading the way. And that is why we're hoping to see eventually our international development budget to be restored to 0.7% of GDP, because not only will it make the world more stable, it will also make the UK a safer and healthier place to live. Thank you, Sir John.
3 minutes each now. Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I thank the member for Dumfries and Galloway for bringing this debate. I put on record my membership of the British-American Parliamentary Group. I also put on record my congratulations to President Trump on his election and inauguration, and I thank him for his role in bringing about the ceasefire in Gaza. A truly special and constructive bilateral relationship between the UK and the US is absolutely essential. So, some key elements of such a relationship must be mutual respect, where both nations respect each other's sovereignty and decisions by valuing each other's perspectives and priorities without imposing one's will on the other. Equality, with a balanced partnership where both countries have an equal say in decisions, with collaborative decision-making, ensuring that both parties benefit fairly from the relationship. Shared goals and values, where the relationship is built on common values such as democracy, human rights and the rule of law. And being a critical friend and having open, transparent and honest communication where both nations are able to express their concerns and opinions freely, fostering an environment of trust and understanding. Instead, I'm afraid to say, the UK-US special relationship is often described as toxic, abusive and destructive due to several key factors. There is an imbalance of power where the relationship is frequently characterised with the UK being the junior partner. This dynamic has led to the UK being pressured into supporting US policies and actions that do not align with our own national interests or ethical standards. Political manipulation by the US forcing the UK's political alignment with sometimes resulting in catastrophic decisions. For example, the UK support for the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 based on questionable or fabricated intelligence and led to significant loss of life and long-term regional instability. A special relationship is important and essential. However, our country's best interest is not served by blind subservience in the face of US power. The disasters of failed wars in Afghanistan and Iraq show only too well where this leads. Those failures post 9/11 continue to reverberate decades later, whether in the form of refugees from Afghanistan appearing on our shores or the continued threat of ISIS. I hope this government's failure to challenge US support for Israeli apartheid in the West Bank and the genocide in Gaza will not also come back to haunt our country in the years and the decades to come. In conclusion, the UK-US special relationship it is crucial for the UK to assert its sovereignty and pursue an independent path that aligns with international law and its own values and be a positive influence on the US. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir John. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. I want to use this debate to try and get an answer to a question that I asked the Prime Minister in PMQs a few weeks ago, to which I didn't get an answer. How does the United Kingdom government hope to obtain a trade deal for the United Kingdom so long as the customs laws, the trades laws and many of the economic laws of a part of this United Kingdom are not made in the United Kingdom by Parliament but are made by the EU? How do we hope, without the unity of a common customs base, a common trade base and common standards affecting the goods that can be imported and exported from our country, do we obtain a trade deal with a third country, such as the United States? And indeed, if President Trump proceeds with his threatened tariffs on the EU, does that mean they will apply to Northern Ireland? Because we are subject to the EU's wretched trade laws and tariffs and everything else that goes with it. So when and how is the United Kingdom going to put ourselves in a position where we can obtain a trade deal applicable to all the United Kingdom, so long as it persists with the partitioning protocol agreement which divides the United Kingdom and leaves part of it under the control of a foreign power? Or is this government interested only in a trade deal which would benefit Great Britain? And has it abandoned any interest in a trade deal for the whole United Kingdom? I would like an answer to that question, and I'd like it to explain how it is even possible legally to obtain a trade deal for the whole United Kingdom so long as this government doesn't control the trade laws of the whole United Kingdom.
Well, I'm very grateful to all honourable and right honourable members for their brevity. In the chair, I'm determined to ensure that those who want to speak get the opportunity to do so. Thank you for your cooperation this afternoon. Liberal Democrat spokesman Callum Miller.
Thank you, Sir John. It is a pleasure to speak with you in the chair today. I would like to thank the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway for securing today's debate on this important topic. The level of interest shown in the debate shows how important this issue is to our country. Many members, including the honourable members for Rugby, Mansfield and Strangford, have spoken warmly of how they have benefited from the historic relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. So let us be in no doubt. The US is a key ally to the UK, and our relationship today is the consequence of close cooperation across many generations. Unfortunately, Donald Trump is not concerned about the preservation of any relationship, threatening Denmark and Panama, bullying Canada and Mexico, undermining NATO by praising Putin's aggression towards Ukraine. In personal and in international relations, this president is unpredictable and disloyal. He breaks laws and lies. He bullies and intimidates. He does not see the benefit of institutions that foster cooperation and promote stability and peace. And this represents a threat to the UK's relationship with the US and to the UK's wider interests. The honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway had some colourful rhetorical flourishes, but these could not mask the brass neck of his remarks. For his Conservative Party is in no position to criticise others for selling the UK short in global affairs. From their botched Brexit deal to the rush trade deals that betrayed British farmers under the last government, the UK shrank from leadership and stood small on the global stage. We know that Donald Trump likes to set the news agenda by making outrageous pronouncements. The only thing I agreed with in the speech by the honourable member for Mid Leicestershire is that we should focus not on those statements, but on his deeds. Sadly, even in these first days in office, there have been actions by the new administration that underscore that we cannot depend on the US in the way that we have in the past. In critical areas, this US administration has moved far away from the rules-based order that has marked the partnership between the UK and the US over the last 60 more years. We have seen, for example, Donald Trump sign an executive order to withdraw the US from the World Health Organization. As my honourable friend, the member for Winchester, has set out, we are in an era when the UK and all countries depend on each other for health security. COVID-19, SARS, Mpox, these viruses know no borders. And so international cooperation is critical if we are to protect our citizens. The honourable member for Clacton said we were lucky in the members of the administration. But since a number of them disregard vaccine science, it is deeply concerning to see the US withdraw from international health cooperation. Donald Trump has also withdrawn the US from the Paris Climate Agreement, while encouraging US oil companies to renew extensive drilling operations, including in sensitive environmental settings. Recent reporting from Copernicus has shown how rapidly the globe is heating. Climate emergencies, from fires in California to extreme rainfall and flooding in Valencia and in the UK, show that the impacts are no abstract future threat. Yet this decision by the new administration sets back hard-won international progress and undermines collective efforts to reduce carbon emissions and protect future generations. Take, too, the recent announcement of a stop to all USAID funding, alongside the briefing that the administration wants to wind up USAID entirely. USAID is the world's largest single aid donor. In 2023, it disbursed $72 billion of aid worldwide. In countries across the globe, UK aid has worked alongside our US partners to support women and girls, the victims of conflict, and those displaced by climate emergencies and natural disasters. So the consequences of this unilateral action by the US administration have been severe. From Ukraine to Syria to Sudan, cuts to US support have put lives at risk while throwing international partnerships into disarray. And as my honourable friend from Winchester highlighted, USAID cuts threaten progress in eradicating illnesses like polio once and for all. We have urged this government not to abandon the Parliament's historic commitment to provide 0.7 GNI in overseas aid. Leadership with our international partners on international development is all the more critical in light of the capriciousness of the US administration. But, Sir John, perhaps the greatest worry comes from the administration's approach to Russia and Ukraine. In the White House, the President described Putin's illegal war as genius. Meantime, his Vice President has advocated a proposal that would give Russia the territory it has illegally seized. The post-war security of Europe was protected under US-UK leadership through NATO. Our defence, security and intelligence partnership with the US has been a cornerstone of UK foreign policy. Yet when the facts change, we must pause and take stock. The harsh truth is that we can no longer rely on the US. It is time for the UK to lead within Europe and ensure the brave Ukrainians are properly supported. Sir John, at a time when non-democratic states like China, Russia, Iran and North Korea seek to menace and undermine democracies, the UK needs partners it can rely on. And you can't say that of Donald Trump. The issue is how to manage this situation. The Conservatives and Reform are currently engaged in an undignified squabble to show who can be the most sycophantic to Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Labour has gone cap in hand to plead with Trump to treat us nicely. On this, I agree with the honourable members for Caerphilly and Spelthorne that we must proceed from a position of strength. Both the Conservative, Reform and Labour parties fundamentally misunderstand that Trump is someone who believes might is right and who scorns those who show weakness. We know that Donald Trump wants to be invited to make a state visit to the UK. If he wants to make our relationship transactional, we can do that too. So the Prime Minister should make clear there will be no state visit unless or until Donald Trump commits to attend a summit on funding and equipping Ukraine to resist Russia's aggression. If Trump comes and commits to defending Ukraine and comes to talk about seizing the Russian assets held in the US, UK and EU so they can fund Ukraine, then we can talk about his state visit. The UK needs to strengthen our position in the face of Trump's bullying. We trade more than twice as much with our closest neighbours in the EU as with the US. They also share our immediate security threats. Unlike the US, many of them are on the front line of Putin's aggression. By showing leadership in European security and by opening negotiations on a new UK-EU customs union, the UK would show Donald Trump that we are serious about leading and that we're not going to bend to his threats.
Shadow Spokesman, Shadow Minister, the Right Honourable Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Sir John, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. Let me start by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Dumfries and Galloway, for securing this very important and very timely debate today. Our bilateral relationship with the United States is one to be cherished. My right honourable friend, the member for Witham, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, represented our party at the inauguration of President Trump last month. And we look forward with optimism at the opportunities presented by his election. With both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary having made those, shall we say, choice remarks about the President, it's fortunate for the Government that our ties with the United States go simply beyond the political. The friendship and affinity between our two peoples and our two countries is profound and it is deep-rooted, manifesting in millions of interactions each and every day, from nearly £300 billion in trading to a cooperation on defence and security and shared cultural values with a commitment to prosperity and freedom. Our diplomatic ties bring all of this together, and as her posting in Washington comes to an end, I pay tribute to Dame Karen Pierce for her work as British Ambassador to Washington, who I had the pleasure of meeting when I was Foreign Minister. This Friday, Sir John, marks 5 years since her appointment, and she has served with distinction. One area ripe for developing, of course, is our trading relationship. In government, we saw our total trade with the United States grow from £123.5 billion in 2010 to £294.1 billion in the 4 quarters to the end of the 3rd quarter of 2024. Labour could go further and get moving on a UK-US free trade deal, which every part of the UK would stand to benefit from. The deal that the Conservative government was drawing up with the last Trump administration is sitting on the shelf. So will the Minister today commit to seizing this golden opportunity and dust off our free trade deal? What discussions has the Minister had with colleagues in the Department for Business and Trade to get back to the negotiating table with President Trump and finish what we started? And in the absence of a full trade deal, does the Government have any plans to negotiate any new state-level agreements? In March last year, we signed a trade pact with Texas. This came just 4 months on from agreeing the UK-Florida Memorandum of Understanding. We also signed the Atlantic Declaration in 2023. And this declaration and the accompanying action plan forms the basis of an innovative partnership across the full spectrum of our trade relations. So I'd like to ask the Minister if he can update us on what he and his colleagues have done since July to build on the Atlantic Declaration and deliver on the action plan. I'd like to now turn to defence, because defence and security cooperation between the UK and the US is particularly crucial within NATO, and we have a key role in influencing other member states to do more. We hosted the 2014 NATO summit and we made the Wales Pledge, and this leadership was clearly
dearly needed at a time when Britain was only one of 4 countries that met the defence spending target. Today, we need to step up to the plate once again. The Conservative Party went into the election with a fully funded plan to increase spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. This was a serious and major financial commitment, but 2.5% should never be seen as an end state, but rather it's a further step on the road back to the sustained increase in defence investment we need to fully upgrade our overall deterrence posture. Our defence policy programme will look both at how we deliver more resources to the military and ensure more funding is well spent. Now, whilst we will always be prudent about the public finances, our approach to defence will be fundamentally threat-driven, with a total focus on delivering a safe and secure United Kingdom. And today, sadly, Sir John, we see Labour are now wobbling on their 2.5% commitment. Now, as I've said, this isn't about the number, but it's about our influence. And if Labour fails to show the leadership in NATO that we did, then we are vacating our role as key influencers within the alliance. Integral to our security partnership are the theatres in which we work closely with the United States. And one of the government's first acts was to rush the Chagos Islands out of the door at any price. And this stands to undermine this. We have been calling for weeks for the government to wait for the new US administration to give a view instead of trying to force through a deal. Now, I'm pleased they finally conceded they need a steer from President Trump before proceeding. So will the Minister now confirm what discussions the government has had with the new administration leading up to the inauguration? We also know that the Foreign Secretary spoke to the US Secretary of State and discussed Diego Garcia. So it's disappointing that we had to drag this out of the government through written questions rather than being candid in their readout, which did not mention Diego Garcia. So this begs the question of what the government is trying to hide. What exactly did he discuss with Secretary Rubio in respect of the Chagos Islands? Will UK and US autonomy of operations on Diego Garcia be absolutely guaranteed? Or has the government offered complete sovereignty, as is being reported in the media this afternoon? And if at the end of the term of the treaty we cannot extend the period over which we exercise sovereign rights on Diego Garcia, does this mean the UK-US base will have to be decommissioned? This failure of diplomacy has so far never failed to bewilder. Rather than flogging our strategic assets along with the kitchen sink, Labour should be focusing on strengthening our shared defence capabilities. And with China, it's difficult to reconcile the clear position of the United States with the approach this government is taking. For all the Chancellor's kowtowing in Beijing, she only returned with £600 million over 5 years to show for it. Where was the China audit? Now, I understand work is underway, but it isn't due to conclude until the spring. So did Foreign Office ministers at least discuss the audit with the Chancellor before she set off? In replies I've had to my WPQ today, let's just say the responses are somewhat lacking in clarity, Sir John. But the readout on Gov.uk was murky, and instead of inviting real scrutiny, the Chancellor preferred to take questions from the state-run media of the Chinese Communist Party. So perhaps the Minister can today enlighten us on what was actually discussed, because we know the new US administration is particularly concerned about China's anti-competitive trade and economic practices, and specifically which aspects of China's economic practices did the Chancellor raise concerns about in Beijing. Now, turning to the Middle East, members of this House know that the root cause of so much of the suffering in the region is the Iranian regime, through their support for Hamas, Hezbollah, and, until its collapse, the Assad regime. Iran sows discord and misery. In April last year, we were lockstep with the United States in responding to Iran's destabilising activity, including its direct attack on Israel. With a coordinated package with the US, leading Iranian military figures were sanctioned, and we tightened the net on key actors within Iran's unmanned aerial, vehicle and missile industries, further limiting their ability to destabilise the region. So can the Minister tell us how the government plans to work with our allies, especially the US, on a robust strategy towards Iran? If our American allies reassert maximum pressure on Iran, Will the Labour government be prepared to harden our policy to support that work? More broadly, in the Middle East, we all welcome the ceasefire deal that's been secured between Hamas and Israel, and we acknowledge the influence President Trump has had in delivering that. It's so important we must all work together with the US, with Israel and Saudi Arabia to build on the Abraham Accords to make sure we see a lasting peace in the region. So, will the Minister ensure the UK is completely or absolutely plugged into these discussions and at the forefront alongside the US? And finally, if I could just turn to Ukraine. As we've done since the very beginning of Russia's illegal invasion, it's crucial that we continue to work extremely closely with the US. American security is on the line in Ukraine. So too is British security and European security. Therefore, we will need to face the ongoing challenges of this war together. And like others, we are keen to learn more about the specific policies the new US administration plans to pursue. We're proud of how we led on support to Ukraine and its people during our time in government. So can the Minister update us on discussions with the new administration regarding Ukraine and what plans there are to continue to build on our considerable support? And to conclude, Sir John, we have no closer ally than the United States. Over the last century, the essential partnership between our two nations has enabled us to lead together on issues of global importance. Our bilateral relationship is underpinned by deep ties between our people, our civil societies, and a thriving economic relationship, and the very closest cooperation on defence and security. It is a friendship to be treasured, and we hope that the government will take the necessary steps to strengthen it for years to come.
Thank you. Order. Before I call the Minister, can I ask that he finishes just a couple of minutes before 4 to give Mr Cooper a chance to wind up the debate. I call the Minister of State for Europe, North America and Overseas Territory, Stephen Doughty.
Well, thank you, Sir John, and it's very good to see you in the chair. I know you're a strong supporter of the UK-US relationship as well, and I want to thank all the members and right honourable members for their contributions today, and particularly the honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway. And I also want, if I may, Sir John, to extend my heartfelt condolences to the families of those who lost their lives in the tragic accidents in both Washington, D.C. and Pennsylvania in recent days. Our thoughts are very much with the American people and the people of those cities at this time. And I pay tribute particularly to the emergency services for their dedicated work in such challenging conditions. And indeed, as we've seen after the terrible attacks in Las Vegas and New Orleans, and indeed the terrible forest fires in Los Angeles. I'm very grateful to the honourable member for securing the debate and his role on the Business and Trade Committee. I didn't agree with all of his comments, you won't be surprised, but I think there were some areas of agreement. I certainly agree with him in his characterisation of the very balanced trading relationship that we have with the United States. That's a point made by others around the room. I agree with him on some of the global threats that we must work on together, and I agree with him about those fundamental values that bind us together in relation to defence, security and liberty. I would gently say to him there are no toadying diplomats. They are motivated by a great degree of duty and service, exemplified by Dame Karen Pierce, who of course will be retiring from her role shortly, so I would take issue with him on that. The partnership between the United Kingdom and the United States is a strong and historic one, and it's understandably of huge interest among members of this House and indeed the wider public, and it's been referenced the important role that BAPG and others play on this, and indeed many individual parliamentarians' links and histories are absolutely crucial to this relationship. We will always do what is right for the British people, and crucial in that is a strong United Kingdom-US relationship. Powerful comments made by my colleague from Birmingham Edgbaston on that point, and indeed our US links have a powerful role to play in delivering on so many UK missions, whether that's ensuring long-term peace and security in the Middle East, in Europe, in the Indo-Pacific, in growing the economy in both of our countries, on delivering on security for our citizens, on propelling the tech revolutions to achieve a sustainable and prosperous future for us all, just to name a few. So this is a timely and important debate, and I'm grateful for the many contributions. I will try my best to respond to them all. We all recognise, Sir John, the extraordinary mandate that President Trump received from the American people in November. It was truly historic, as rightly emphasised by my honourable friend from Mansfield, and he was right also to talk about the challenges faced by the American people, indeed his own constituents, in relation to growth in the economy, matters that we are absolutely resolute in attempting to address as a government. And we see this as an opportunity to engage with the United States with a renewed sense of energy, dynamism and purpose. And we've been forthright in extending our congratulations to President Trump on his victory. And indeed, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have reiterated their commitment to working closely with him and his administration. The Prime Minister spoke to the President on the 26th of January, and the warmth of their discussion demonstrated that the friendship between our countries is not restricted to any one political party or tradition, as has been made rightly by a number of members here today. Our relationship transcends those. I know the Foreign Secretary similarly was delighted to speak to Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the 27th of January, and they expressed their eagerness to commence work together to address our many shared challenges, including the situation in the Middle East, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, and indeed the challenges posed by China. And I want to pay tribute particularly to President Trump's work in securing that ceasefire and the release of hostages that was referred to. I'm going to make some progress if that's okay, and I will try and come back if I have time at the end, but there were a lot of points made. They also reaffirmed our enduring commitment to the AUKUS partnership, which promotes a free and open Indo-Pacific. And the depth of our defence relationship, which has been rightly referred to by many members opposite, I think very aptly by the member for Spelthorne, and thank him for his service. I think that depth of that relationship remains an essential pillar of our collective security. And in an increasingly unstable world, we agree that NATO should be strengthened and defence spending increased to adapt to new threats. And that is why the Prime Minister has underlined our cast-iron commitment to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence. And the UK looks forward to working with President Trump to ensure our NATO alliance keeps Americans and Europeans safe, including in regions such as the Arctic. We will not tolerate attempts to disrupt critical infrastructure or restrict freedom of navigation by our adversaries. And there is no global security without Arctic security. So alongside our closest allies, we are ready to support security in that region. It's one of the reasons I travelled there for the Arctic Circle Assembly recently. Equally, has been rightly mentioned, including by the Shadow Minister, our support for Ukraine is ironclad. When the Prime Minister was in Kiev last month, he saw firsthand the unrelenting aggression from Russia that Ukrainians face every day. And as the PM has said, the US has played a vital role alongside allies in supporting Ukraine. Our collective stance should be to help Ukraine to be in the strongest possible position in the months to come. And I thank the Shadow Minister and indeed other honourable and rightful members for their support and comments on this. BIOS has been mentioned by a number of members. I know many members here feel strongly about it. I would strongly advise them to take much of the reporting on this, especially regarding the finances, with a large pinch of salt. The government, and I will repeat what I've said in the House before, inherited a situation where the long-term future of the UK-US military base on Diego Garcia, which is so vital to UK and US security, was under threat. And finalising a deal means we can secure that base strong protections, including from malign influence, that will allow the base to operate unchanged well into the next century, and in close collaboration with the US, and it's right that we give them the time to consider that deal. We will only agree to a deal that is in the UK's best interest, those of our allies, and protects our collective national security. And I've answered many questions. I'm going to make progress because I'm very, very conscious of the time. Since taking office, the UK has shown strong international leadership on climate and a steadfast commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we remain committed, of course, to an impactful and reformed WHO. However, global issues, of course, require collective action, Sir John, and that's why the UK will continue to work with partners, including the US, our closest ally, to advance shared goals. Now, a lot of the comments today, Sir John, are focused rightly on the strength of our economic and trading relationship, and that is an absolute crucial pillar of our relationship, and strengthening our economic partnership with the US is a core component of this government's growth mission. We only have to reflect on Robert Lighthizer past statement that the Anglo-American trade relationship may be the healthiest in the world almost a decade later, and the same can be said today. And crucially, as has been said, and I really do want to emphasise this, we have a fair and balanced trading relationship which benefits both sides of the Atlantic. It's a relationship worth more than £300 billion a year, nearly a fifth of all UK trade. We have more than £1 trillion invested in each other's economies, and more than 1 million Americans work for UK-owned businesses, and the same the other way too. And of course, these relationships go far beyond London and Washington, DC. We heard about the important relationships with Scotland and Scotch whisky that the honourable member sponsoring this debate outlined, strong ties in my own community in Wales. And we also heard about the strong ties with Northern Ireland, absolutely. And from US defence manufacturing in Bedfordshire to close to 50,000 jobs supported by UK companies in Vice President Vance's home state of Ohio, the US is an extraordinarily dynamic economy with a huge amount of potential for the UK. And our countries share a determination to drive economic growth. That's the UK government's core aim. We're committed to open and free trade and its crucial role in delivering economic growth. And while we might have a different philosophical approach to tariffs, we will continue to seize opportunities to boost trade with the US in a way that promotes growth, creates jobs and aligns with the UK's national interests. And indeed, we seek to strengthen relationships at all levels of the US economy, including with cities, with states. And I've had a pleasure of meeting many governors and lieutenant governors over the last few months to discuss those. We're not going to choose between our allies, as the Prime Minister has said. This is not a case of either America or Europe. Indeed, that's apparently my own family history, which I'll come to later. We are inexorably bound together. We face the same global threats and challenges, and we have a strong will to overcome these together. And our national interest demands we work with both, and that's exactly what we will do. And I cannot end without reflecting on the vibrant links between the peoples of the United States and the United Kingdom. And I'm particularly proud in that regard of my own family ties to the United States, including my American grandfather, Harold, who fought in Europe in World War II, came over from the Bronx, from New York, from a strong tradition of service and duty that I think binds our two peoples together, including in the armed forces. My family history goes back to Pennsylvania in the 1700s. And indeed, I have many, many ties across the United States. I've visited, I think, 25 of the United States now in my life and counting. And I'm honoured to be the Minister with responsibility for those relationships. And as I said, those relationships are across all of the United States and indeed across all parts of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I'm looking forward to marking the 250th anniversary of US independence next year, as well as, of course, the FIFA World Cup, hosted by Canada, Mexico and the US, not to mention, of course, the LA Olympics in 2028. And, of course, speaking of sports, the Honourable Member for Dumfries and Galloway is, as he said, well aware of President Trump's deep affection for Scotland, and his mother having been born on the Isle of Lewis, and with his golf resort, Trump Turnberry. I have some own family history with Scotland and Kirkcudbrightshire, and having studied at St Andrews, also a key golfing location in Scotland. And the President's deep affection for our country and all parts of it, I think, is well understood, and indeed for our royal family. And we really welcome that affection and those special ties, another sign of our special relationship. We also have incredible educational ties, including through the Marshall Scholarship Programme. I've met many of the Marshall Scholars. We count a CIA director, 5 US ambassadors, 2 members of Congress, 6 Pulitzer Prize winners, a NASA astronaut and a Nobel laureate among our Marshall alumni. I am conscious of the time. I will very, very briefly give way, but
I'm very grateful. This is a wonderful description of familial and other ties. Would he address the fact that the current US administration is of a very different nature to previous ones? And can he answer how the government is addressing that change?
Well, as I said, we're going to focus on our common agendas globally, and those are growth, on defence, on security, on common prospects for our peoples, and that is very much what this government is focused on, and our relationship transcends all administrations, all parties. I think that has been very, very clear under multiple governments in the United States and in the United Kingdom in the past. And I do want to take this opportunity before concluding, Sir John, to in particularly thank our consulates, the incredible work they do across the United States to promote strong ties for us, and of course to thank Dame Karen Pierce, as the Shadow Minister did, for her tremendous leadership as Ambassador to the US. It's been a pleasure to work with her and her team. She's done an outstanding job of nurturing the relationship over the last 3 years through the pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and of course our own elections. And Lord Mandelson, the next Ambassador to the US, who I met just yesterday, will bring his extensive foreign and economic knowledge, strong business links and experience at the highest levels of government, not least in trade, to the table. And I know he will seize that new role with the same level of vigour and diligence and enthusiasm for our relationship as those who preceded it. Let me conclude, Sir John, by saying we have a vital and dynamic alliance between the United Kingdom and the US. We might not always agree on everything, but there is a huge amount on which we do agree, and we all want to feel our voters feeling the benefits of economic growth in their pockets. We want peace and security, not just in the Middle East, but globally in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. We want to harness the tech revolution for all of our peoples, and together we're going to face these challenges. Our special relationship has endured, it continues to endure, and it will endure. It's forged in blood, it's formed in common ideals, and it's focused on the well-being and security of our citizens. It is a remarkable story, and long may it continue.
Thank you. John Cooper to wind up, leaving me a few moments to put the question. John Cooper.
Thank you, Sir John, and thank you to all the honourable and right honourable members who have taken part today. I'd like to associate myself with the Minister's remarks about the aviation tragedies in America. Our hearts with all those affected. It's clear from this debate that the strength of our relationship with America matters a very great deal to us. I want to pick out one or two members' contributions. Thank you to the honourable lady from Birmingham and Edgbaston, who told us that the birds and bees have been upgraded to the rhinos and sloths, apparently. I shall resist saying too much about Orangemen, but suffice it to say that the honourable member for Strangford is not a fan of fake tan, I suspect. And can I also thank my honourable and gallant friend for Spelthorne. He, better than most of us, knows the importance of immediate action. And we must take that message away when we consider defence spending. We need to urgently see where we are with that. And can I conclude by saying that perhaps the honourable member for Clacton might take across to America the message that rather than us being junior partners, that we might perhaps not become the 51st state of the USA, but in fact that they might like to come back in under the furled umbrella of the British Empire. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The question is that this House has considered the UK-US bilateral relationship. As many of that other opinions say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.